everybody. Hi, Mike. This is the progress report. We're here on Wednesday, March 10th.
Oh, you're on the air.
And it's nice to think that next week, Mike, when I come downtown, and I can't wait till you can join me down here. Believe me, I don't like being here all by myself looking at a screen.
As soon as I get
my
my
favorite
shots.
people in the world are on the screen with me. I'm just looking forward to the day when you'll be back here and can harass me in person instead of over the goddamn Skype. And it's
Watch your language, Bob.
language. Okay.
Are we on the air? Are we on the air?
Yeah, we're on the air. We're on the air. And this vast audience is eagerly awaiting our wisdom. And next
Bob,
week is
can
St.
I
Patrick's
jump in?
Day.
Can I jump in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day? Can I just make a quick announcement? I'm very, very pleased and grateful to Mayor Craig and proud to announce that Mayor Craig has declared the month of March Irish Heritage Month in the city of Manchester.
Okay.
Which she has done for several years. It means a lot. The month of March, the reason it's important to people of Irish heritage, of course, is because the Feast of St. Patrick falls right smack dab in the middle of it.
Yeah.
It's a good month. We move from the winter into the spring. It's a month of hope. It's a month of Lent where we think about how we can improve ourselves. Unfortunately, I'm very sorry to say that there will be no St. Patrick's Parade again this year in Manchester due to the COVID.
A serious loss. It is indeed.
But we are coming back next year, bigger, better, stronger than ever. So people have something to look forward to. And, our show next week falls right on the high holiday. So who knows? We may we may have some folks to talk about that on the show next week.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
I'm counting on you, Mike. I'm counting on you. But today, in addition to having you on the screen, and I hope highly available to our audience, so we have the guy I like to call my hero. It's Renny Robert Cushing. Renny Robert Cushing.
Thank you, Governor.
Well, Renny, I'm tempted to spend about half of the show just talking about your amazing self and your personal history. I've met many fine people since I've been back in my home state of New Hampshire for many, many years, but I can't imagine anybody has a more fascinating life history, a greater record of a serious accomplishment than Robert Renny Cushing. And, I got to tell a couple stories, Renny.
Uh-oh.
Okay. How many people know that Robert Renny Cushing, he's first of all a dad of three wonderful younger ladies. He's one of the most active and imaginative people ever to, propel a citizen active movement called the Clamshell Alliance. People of my age and even Mike's age will remember what that's all about. The opposition to the Seabrook nuclear project. Most people kind of forget that there was going to be two reactors at Seabrook. There's only one. I think Mr. Cushing can take some credit for that and for the demise of nuclear power, not only around New England, down to 2 reactors out of 9, but around the world. But here's some of the other things Mr. Cushing has done. One time he decided to go out and see what life was like in the Deep South, and he went to work for the Atlanta Sanitation Department. And I believe he may have been perhaps the only white guy on the back of a sanitation truck going around collecting up the garbage of the citizens of Atlanta, Georgia. How many people would think of doing that? And another thing he did that really tickles me, because I'm a big rail fan, as you know, he decided he'd like to see the country by rail. Buy a ticket on Amtrak? Oh, no. Renny didn't buy a ticket on Amtrak. He went up to the Portland rail yards and hopped on a freight train. And wherever the freight train went, that's where Renny went. And he had his adventures with the screws, and he had to go to court for, abusing the railroad's property by adding to the weight of their freight cars. And the next day he'd get on another train and keep going. I'm telling you, this guy is an amazing person. It's been my privilege to know him. And today, Mr. Cushing, my hero is, and this really astonished me, in spite of the fact that he's facing serious health risks in his personal life, he somehow managed at the late hour to get into the contest to be the Democratic candidate for Speaker of the New Hampshire House, and as a result of the last election. We all know that the Democrats came a little short of retaining the majority in the House, which meant he could not be the Speaker. But he could be the minority leader, which is can be a speaker in waiting, and I hope that's the case for Renny. And I was busy making phone calls for another candidate, an excellent person I thought would be a great leader, and if possible speaker, Matt Wilhelm from New Hampshire. And in the middle of making my phone calls, I learned that Renny Cushing, although he had a very serious diagnosis of an advanced cancer, I hope this is all okay with you, Renny, that his oncologist had told him that if he wanted to do it, his oncologist said, I think you can do this. So I immediately switched from making calls from Mr. Wilhelm, a fine guy and a guy I think has got a great future in politics and otherwise, and started making calls for Renny, and on the third vote, he won. Renny Cushing won. And I tell you, one of the reasons that he won, I'm sure, is not only is he imaginative and hardworking and forward-looking, but he has a record of accomplishment that's hard to believe. We do not have the death penalty anymore in Manchester and in New Hampshire, not Manchester, New Hampshire. And nobody is more responsible for ending the death penalty in the state of New Hampshire than Renny Cushing, who suffered personal tragedy in his own life with two of his family members, one being his beloved dad, a World War II Marine veteran, who was brutally murdered in Hampton many years ago. And Renny Cushing, despite that terrible tragedy in his own life, has made it one of his key missions in life to end the death penalty in New Hampshire. And he did it. He did it with many fine people helping. I mean, I don't want to just say Renny did it alone. He didn't. But that's one of Renny's skills. He can enlist people. He can look at the long
Bob, if
game.
I can jump in on that, please. I want to say one very, very important factor in that was the relentlessness of the message. Just staying with it and staying with it and staying with it,
right.
And suffering defeat and coming back and suffering defeat and coming back. That's what's one of the things that I look up to Renny for, is just his ability to just stay and stay and stay. It's amazing.
Stay and stay and stay, and to realize that it was going to take a long game. He brought people to New Hampshire that had been wrongly put on death row and had somehow escaped the executioner. And those were powerful witnesses. He worked with Sister Helen Prejean, who was featured in a great movie starring Sarah Sarandon, right, on the death penalty. He's one of the most effective people in the New Hampshire legislature. I don't even agree with Renny on everything. I think I disagree with him on, but I do think he's one of the great citizens of New Hampshire, and it's really a pleasure to have you with me. My hero, Renny Cushing. So with all of that.
All right, Bob.
Set the bar really low for you, Renny, didn't he?
Right. No, I thought we could, I could recount the tale of perhaps my most ambitious journey was when I rode freights from Sydney, Nova Scotia to Vancouver, British Columbia, because in my younger days, someone told me before I died, I should hop freights through the Canadian Rockies, and I got to do that. But those are other stories. And the reason I ended up working on the garbage truck in the city of Atlanta is because when I was growing up in Hampton, I had a job working on the back of a garbage truck. So I was qualified, and I didn't know until I got to Atlanta that white people didn't work on the back of a garbage truck. So yes, you are correct. I was the first. I helped, as I say, I helped integrate the Public Works Department of the city of Atlanta, but it was also a time where, quite frankly, I learned a lot working on the back of a garbage truck, because I learned about why there were some neighborhoods, white neighborhoods we picked up twice a week, black neighborhoods we picked up once a week. All the supervisors were white, all the people on the back of the garbage trucks were black. This was in 1971, where there still were remnants of, white and colored signs over public, drinking fountains and other facilities. But I learned a lot.
I'm sure you did. And as I say, I could go on. I got lots more stories I could tell about Renny, but I don't want to spend the whole hour on that. Maybe we can have him back. And I hope somebody writes your biography, Renny. If you don't, you'll have to write your autobiography. That's something you should do. Those are nice interjections. So you are the leader of the Democrats in the New Hampshire House. They are, I think, 12 short of having a majority, which is, to my way, is a real sad situation. Hope something that can be fixed. But one of the things that's been in the news and you've been much involved in since you became the leader is that is whether or not the House, as general, and particularly for people with serious health problems like you share with several of your colleagues, cannot participate and be a voting member of the New Hampshire House unless you are physically present at a meeting somewhere. And, recently we've had those meetings at the Field House, at the Whittemore Center, the hockey arena. And then we've had the drive-in thing, at the UNH. And then we've had the thing at the big sports place down in Bedford. And I think people may know that you initiated, I presume, but had several co-plaintiffs, including two fine reps from Manchester, Diane Langley and Ken Snow, my good friend from Ward 12, both also suffering, serious limitations. Diane's in a wheelchair. Ken is very mobility limited. Why can't this be done so that people like you and these others that cannot easily just go to places participate remotely, particularly since the Supreme Court ruled there was no constitutional barrier to this? Why is this not available to you and others in your situation?
Well, unfortunately, a political decision was made that there would not be the reasonable accommodation of having hybrid sessions for the legislature, for the House of Representatives. I mean, obviously, 20 other legislators in the country have figured out how to do that. Our own Senate meets remotely. But, when I became leader in November, I began conversations with the majority, with the incoming Republican speakers, about how can we respond to this public health crisis in a way that complies with guidelines, that we can be working together to find a solution to the pandemic. Unfortunately, there are people who don't believe that the pandemic is real within the Republican caucus. There are people who conflate inconvenience with oppression and somehow think that being asked to wear a mask and to infringes upon their right to spread their viruses on whomever they want. And although we tried in good faith to work with the speaker, came up with a number of proposals, at the end of the day, there was not a willingness to reach an accommodation. So we filed suit in federal district court. We asked on behalf of our most vulnerable members, people who would enjoy the protections of the Americans with Disability Act, that the speaker simply figure out a way to allow them to participate remotely by Skype, as we're doing, by Zoom. I mean, you think about what's happened in the past year. We've asked everybody to put public safety first, to not congregate in large groups, to not, to wear masks. And we've asked everyone to make sacrifices. We've had graduations have been canceled. Family reunions have been canceled. We've all been trying to pull together for this. But rather than put public health first, unfortunately, some of the Republican leadership has put politics before that. So we went to federal court, a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, the judge didn't agree with our request for a petition because the speaker has invoked this common law of legislative immunity. Mm-hmm. So we're now in this situation because of common law immunity, where the speaker says that trumps the Americans with Disabilities Act, where essentially the speaker is saying, under common law, I have the authority to do whatever I want. The majority has the authority to do whatever it wants. And there's no ability to review. There's no ability to challenge it. I mean, theoretically, the speaker could decide that, we won't allow women to testify at public hearings. We'll require black people to sit in the back of, people of color sit in the back of Reps Hall. And so what began as kind of an interesting, not an interesting, but a hopeful discussion with the speaker about how we could work together to allow everyone to participate. And it has now ended up being kind of a larger confrontation over the authority of the speaker and whether or not the New Hampshire legislature itself is beyond the reach of the Americans with Disabilities Act or anything else that we could invoke. So we've appealed that case. It's going to the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. Briefs are coming, and The first week in April, we'll have an oral argument. So we'll see what we can do. As a practical matter, it means that people that you spoke about, Ken Snow and Diane Langley, representatives who are elected by their constituents to represent their perspective, are barred from participating in the middle of a pandemic because the speaker won't allow them to do what everyone else is allowed to do, and that's participate remotely in the votings and the discussions.
Renny, can I jump in on that? Because
Yep.
as I understand it, there are some Republican members of the House who are making themselves present at these large gathering events, where they have the space, but refusing to wear masks.
Absolutely.
So not only are they denying the ability to appear remotely and have a conversation as clearly and as unambiguously as you and I are right now, but they're also adding danger to the venue by not wearing masks and potentially shedding virus all over the place. That could potentially harm these vulnerable representatives.
Absolutely, and we've seen it. Quite frankly, there hasn't always been good faith dealings with the Republican majority. Before, after the election.
You're generous.
Pardon?
I said you're generous.
Well, I'm trying to be generous because I do think people can disagree, have honest disagreements, and try to sort out their differences. Or agree to disagree, but it's really important for our democracy that people do so in good faith. And so what has transpired is, for instance, the Republicans met in caucus to select their leader, and they met at they met at the McIntyre Ski Lodge at McIntyre, and there was a bet-in person, and out of that, a number of people contracted COVID-19. In fact, we didn't, but they neglected to tell Democrats that there were members who had COVID-19, and even on the eve of when we were assembling to select, the speaker. Democrats, on the other hand, we met remotely, and everyone got to vote. We're still in a situation now where, to a certain extent, the legislative committees are going forward. They're meeting remotely. They're doing business. But when it comes to the sessions themselves, there's been, opposition to it. And I hate to say that, but I think the reason that there's opposition to it, it's part of kind of a pattern of voter suppression in many ways. That the reason that the Republicans are opposing it, quite frankly, has to do with the numbers. They know that the Democrats have for whatever reasons, people who are representatives who are perhaps more vulnerable during this pandemic. Yeah. And it's a calculated risk that, if we don't provide an accommodation, they won't be able to be there, and they won't be able to vote against the extreme agenda that this Republican caucus is putting forward. And when I say extreme agenda, we can get into that, but it's, in many ways, it's the attack on public education. It's the attack on the autonomy of women. It's the attack on abortion. It's the attack on birth control. It's the attack on the environment and all of the protections, many of which were enacted in I look at science, technology and energy under Bob Backus, his leadership. There were a number of advances in trying to deal with climate change and trying to deal with green energy, that's under attack. We've had to put forward a proposal that the governor supported to deal with a housing crisis in the state of New Hampshire. And again,
we know about that here in Manchester.
Right. And so that one, much to our amazement, that the governor supported, and the Republicans have, defeated that initiative. There's an attack on the very franchise itself. I think the Republicans have concluded that if too many people vote, they'll vote them out of office, and there may be some truth to that. So we see efforts at all kinds of voter suppression that is taking place. I could go on. There's attack on working people. Attempts to try to, there's no effort to increase the minimum, opposition to increasing the minimum wage, and in fact, part of their prime agenda seems to be to pass the so-called right to work law, which will only break up unions and add to income inequality. That's the purpose.
Let me just break in here quick, Renny, and Mike, to let our viewers know that we do welcome calls. I'm sure everybody who's familiar with the show knows that, but we would really like to have some calls. 640-3091 if you'd like to join us on the air with a question or comment for either Mike or me, or especially for our distinguished guest, the Honorable Renny Robert Cushing. And, you know, Renny, I practiced law, as you know, for a long, long time here in Manchester, going way back when. And I always tried to understand the arguments of the opposing side, because that's what you need to deal with. You ought to understand where they're coming from. I just don't get what the argument against accommodating, well, people generally, since the U.S. New Hampshire Supreme Court said there's no constitutional impediment to moving forward with remote voting in the House sessions, as we have in the committees now. You know, the committees are still doing voting by Zoom technology. Why couldn't the House do it? And if you didn't think that was good, why not accommodate the 12 of you, and as we mentioned, Diane Langley and Ken Snow and several others, who have the real physical problem of being in attendance? What is their argument?
Well, the speaker just kept telling me he just doesn't believe in remote sessions.
Well, that doesn't seem like an argument.
Yeah, I wonder
like
if the speaker before him believed in remote sessions.
Well, you know, unfortunately, that's one of the things that I find somewhat sobering and disconcerting, the fact that the previous speaker, Dick Hinch, died of COVID.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that there would be a little bit more sensitivity toward that and understanding. And I will acknowledge that, you know, you talked about people who won't wear masks within the Republican caucus.
Yeah.
That crew. But there are also members within the Republican caucus who themselves fear for their safety because of the reckless activities of other members of the Republican caucus.
Yeah, but they're cowards and they stay silent. They won't speak up.
Well, sometimes they talk to me and they actually thank me for trying to stick up for at least my my caucus. Real people of conviction. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge,
yeah.
And you know, we're hopeful that the Court of Appeals in Boston will take another look at this notion of legislative immunity and come down on the side of legislative immunity, not trumping, the right to be represented, not trumping the Americans with Disabilities Act. Yeah. We'll see.
So you mentioned one thing I'd like to go into a little bit more, and that is the attempt at voter suppression, which is a nationwide phenomenon. It's just astonishing what's happening in, particularly states like Georgia and Arizona, where, to the surprise of the Republicans, they did not carry the presidential election for Trump. And in Georgia, where the two senators, U.S. senators from Georgia, were elected in an astounding result in a special runoff election. And now the pushback against voting rights, ending, limiting early voting, limiting polling stations in Georgia, I guess. And the latest thing is kind of preventing people from voting on Sunday after they go to church, which a lot of the black folks that tend to vote almost entirely Democratic do. All these things.
Yeah, not too racist to move.
What?
Right.
I said not too racist to move.
No.
The blatant racism of that whole Georgia phenomenon is amazing.
It certainly is.
It's amazing. I can't believe that people can.
They're shameless.
Can show their face in public.
Shameless. But what are the major vehicles they're using to limit voting opportunities in New Hampshire, Renny? And what are the chances of not letting them prevail on this, since you're the minority?
There are just a host of bills that are chipping away at the right to franchise, that are aimed at suppressing students from being able to vote, that are aimed at making it more difficult in terms of requirements for absentee voting, in terms of limiting the ability to do absentee voting. It's a long list. I think, unfortunately, some of the legislation that's passed, I think, won't pass constitutional muster. We don't know, given the vagaries of our court system. But I would say right now, the fact that the Republicans hold the majority make it very challenging for us as Democrats to stop that legislation.
Yeah. I mentioned your campaign against the death penalty in New Hampshire, and the signal result of that was that it took an override of a gubernatorial veto by Governor Sununu. I think it's one of only 2 of his many, many vetoes,
right.
79 in 2 terms, or maybe it's more than that, that actually occurred, which is an incredible achievement. But I think, one of the most dismaying vetoes he cast was against an independent electoral commission, which, to me, it was saying as Democrats, if we'd won this time, as if we'd won in 2010, we would have been in control of redistricting. We could have favored our own side, but we were ready to give all that up and have an independent electoral commission, which has been experienced with success in other states in the union, and the governor vetoed that. Is there any move to move forward with such a commission again in this session, or?
Yes, there was, and it was defeated. It came up. Ben there defeated the bill. What's happening now with redistricting is the Speaker has appointed a special committee of 15 people, 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats, that are going to take up all the redistricting bills. They met yesterday for the first time and are just holding those bills because the census data is not available. I mean, I think the hope that we have is, with the federal government, with House Resolution 1, the John, the voter protection bill there, which provides for independent redistricting commission. I tell you, it was quite disconcerting for many people to watch the chair of the Republican committee boast and guarantee that there'll be a Republican seat in Congress from New Hampshire, knowing full well that they will make sure that they can try to jam every Republican they possibly can and exclude every Democrat they possibly can within one of the congressional districts to ensure that they have a Republican seat going there. We don't know what how this will unfold because there's also kind of a countervailing thought that, well, maybe if we keep them more equally aligned, we may have an ability to actually win 2. But whatever they come up with, it's not going to be, as far as I can tell, it's not going to be with the intent of promoting fair elections. Rather than have the people choose their representatives, it's the representatives that want to choose their electors, and that's the districts that we've seen. I mean, we've dealt with the legacy of the last redistricting, where you got your executive councilor district 2. It's the only council. It's one district that can touch 3 state borders and snake it right around. It goes from Dover to Winchester and Keene, and it snakes around, so it picks up. It can pick up Dover and Durham and Concord and Keene, and very interesting the way that they do that.
This is the technique where they try and pack all the Democrats into districts that are already leaning Democratic, so they can make the other districts, which would make up a majority. In this case, we're talking about the executive council, more likely to be Republican, and unfortunately, it works. It works.
Right. Or in some cases, like they'll start pulling out take a ward out of a city, like the example is Portsmouth. They decided to take Ward 6 out of Portsmouth and put it in with the towns of Northampton and Greenland and Newington, so that one of the heavily Democratic town gets glommed onto 3 Republican, heavily Democratic ward gets glommed onto 3 Republican-leaning towns, and they're defining the community of interest in that. I mean,
they did that. They threw Litchfield at Ward 8 too. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we do have a very convoluted system. I'll just say that.
Yeah. So, do you have any areas where you think there can be enough cooperation in the legislature, and particularly, of course, in the House, the 400-member House, to get things done that you would approve of? Is there any area where we can cooperate with the other side, which is now not by much, but enough to the majority,
Right.
so you can get some things done?
I think one area that I'm optimistic about is in the area of criminal justice reform and police reform. Last summer, in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, where there was a fair amount of call for reckoning about relations between law enforcement and how in the face of minority communities, people of color, Governor Sununu set up a LIAC. It set up a law enforcement. I can't remember it's an acronym, but it was an assembly of people that took a look at some of the issues relating to law enforcement and policing, and that met for a couple months. It put forward some proposals that were agreed upon by unanimously, and those are now before the legislature in the form of a bill that was prime sponsored by Senator Bradley, but it does take a look at a number of reforms, including like police body worn cameras. I think to a certain extent there's a general realization that there are problems with our criminal justice system that need to be addressed. The fact that here in the state of New Hampshire we spend about I think $83 million a year on our state university system and $123 million a year on our Department of Corrections. Some of us recognize that when you spend, for every time you spend $1 on a college classroom, you spend $1.50 on a jail cell. That's not a sustainable model. So I think there's a way that people are trying to look at that. I think we're also trying to have a reckoning with with this legacy questions, not about racial discrimination, but not just about that, but also issues around equity. Dealing with unconscious bias.
Hey, Renny, you either got to lower your head or up your camera a little bit because we're only.
There we go.
Well, I'm sorry.
There you are. We want to see the whole beautiful effect here.
No, it's like it's like when you really want to. I started to lean in on the conversation, and that's what happens. I was trying to talk about police reform, about the need for, body-worn cameras, about the need for training for judges, for dealing in law enforcement, for dealing with implicit bias.
Yeah.
A lot of things that we need to deal with. So that is one area that I am cautiously optimistic that we can find common ground.
Can you explain why you're optimistic, Renny? Because those are all issues that are near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to Bob's and a lot of other people. But yet it seems that the people that we need to negotiate with on these issues are more interested in Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss. Why are you optimistic? I'm sorry, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm pessimistic about the ability to work across the aisle. I've almost given up on it, but yet you remain so hopeful. Tell us why.
I remain hopeful because there's a libertarian impulse, I think, that manifests itself in some elements of the Republican caucus that has a distrust of abuse of power of law enforcement and of our government in general. And I think there is a willingness on some aspects of criminal justice reform to find common ground, work together. I mean, we're at the point now. I think most people think that that we shouldn't be putting people in jail because they possess cannabis. We think that a lot of people think that, people shouldn't just be able to be pulled over. There shouldn't be a system in place that we're just going to pull over anybody who is, not white, or have a system of how we screen people who we're going to take into possession who come engaged in law enforcement. So, I think that, I think there's a lot of support, for instance, for use of police body cameras, because anecdotally, or even data indicates that the use of police body cameras has a beneficial effect upon everybody. It makes everybody on their best behavior. It makes the person who's stopped or interacting with the law enforcement on their best behavior because they know they're on the camera. It makes the individual who's wearing the camera on their best behavior, and it leads to de-escalation. It's where, we're trying to figure out how to a certain extent, how to use data and figure out what works in our criminal justice system, because ultimately that saves money, and that's always something people can find common ground on.
So, one of the signal events of your now still pretty young time as the leader of the minority here in the New Hampshire House was, and it's interesting, here we are pretty much getting toward the middle of March, and we've only had 2 House session days to deal with bills. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And normally by this time it would have been much further down the calendar. And I just wonder how much business is actually going to get done in this session, which is another subject. But in the first one, there was a time came when you thought the majority was doing things that were very abusive, and you led the Democrats to walk out of the venue they were in at that time, which I think was over at UNH. Maybe it was the drive-in thing, or I don't remember what it was. But, I heard about that, and there was a lot of criticism of that. But I also heard Kevin Landrigan report, I think on the Exchange, I don't think I saw this in the paper, that the speaker then, when you tried to return, that you were not immediately allowed to return. Now, the reason, as I understand it, this is something that's happened before. If the speaker thinks that the attendance is about to fall below a quorum for doing things by majority vote, and if we don't have a quorum, you have to do things by a 2/3 vote, which is really tough. So the doors have been locked to keep people from leaving. Right. I guess that was maybe the situation. You thought you would be able to end the quorum and stop the majority from doing things that you felt were bad for New Hampshire. But then when the speaker declared that there was still a quorum and you wanted to come back in, you were not allowed to. Have I got that right?
In part. I mean, there were a whole series of events that took place that completely marginalized the minority. We were totally blindsided, and in part it's to carry out their agenda of banning abortions. After the speaker had made an announcement that we would be following the calendar, we'd be leaving, when the majority leader got up to make what many of us assumed was going to be a third reading, a motion that would lead to us to adjourn, instead moved to bring forward from the calendar from the next day's calendar an abortion bill. That was the other instinct. So as leader, I asked to have a caucus, and I've never known, in my experience, of a situation where the minority leader or the majority leader asked for a recess so that there could be a caucus, where that was denied. And then there was the ask, well, we weren't allowed that to take place. And then some people
that is amazing. I had not heard that, and I agree with you. I've never heard of such a thing of not letting the speaker not allow the minority party to have a caucus.
Right, and that was it. That was like, okay, that is never. I've been in situations where there's, the majority or minority will ask for caucus. The speaker will grant 15 minutes. If the majority asks for the caucus, and it's in the State House, the minority have to leave. If the minority asks for it, they have to leave, and they go across the street. But that is just something that was, such a deviation from normal practice. And then the speaker went, and people started. We called for a caucus out. Then we asked to leave. Then the speaker locked people out, locked people in, but he also locked people out. And the Constitution does allow the speaker to have the authority to close the doors, and even go out and send law enforcement to round up people and reps and bring them back into the State House or the venue. But he does not have the authority to lock people out. So we're in a situation where, he was trying to have it. He was like, don't leave, but don't come back in. And that's, kind of creates a unique crisis again. That has never been done. It was clearly beyond, his authority, seemingly. But, that I would like to say that that's kind of anomalous about what the session has been like, but I don't think it is. There's just to me, what's in many ways sad is that our notion of civil discourse within the legislative body is really at risk.
Yeah.
In all kinds of little ways, without getting into the weeds that probably wouldn't be that interesting to your listeners, I'll just say that there's some tensions. We remain open and try to have conversations with the majority, but then they come back and do outrageous things. We had an example, a member of our committee, a member of the House, Rosemary Rung, had posted on her private Facebook page, a note objecting to the fact that, a police chief, and I can't remember the community.
I think it was Troy out in Cheshire County.
Right. Yeah. Had gone to the white supremacist rally in Stop the Steal, whatever, the one that, elevated the myth that Trump lost the election, and questioned that. And out of nowhere, the speaker kind of notifies me that he's just taking that woman off of her committee because she criticized this member of law enforcement and stripped her from a committee where it remains today. This is at the same time where he has, a member of his leadership, the chair of State Federal Relations, called for the assassination of the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And you have all people posting anti-Semitic postings on their, web pages. And it's really clear that, and it goes back to the day that the speaker was elected, where his acceptance speech, was all about how it was demonizing Democrats. I've never seen a speech where the outcome was not. Usually, if the speaker is going to be, you're magnanimous, you say we look forward to working together.
Are you talking about the current speaker?
I'm talking about the current speaker, Bob. At the drive-in theater day, the drive-in movie, it was like he was nominated, and in his nomination speech, he just went right at the Democrats. Yeah. If you haven't seen it, I'll share it with you. We'd appreciate, because it was so. I mean, it kind of stunned those of us who've been there for a long time, because we're just not used to having that. You think of the speaker as being kind of a statesman, role on some level above the, protecting the institution.
Even more than a statesman, Renny, your friend and mine, Steve Shurtleff, who was the last Democratic speaker, he said to me, and I think he said it publicly, I consider it my duty to protect the rights of the minority. I'm the speaker for all the House. I'm not just the leader of the majority party. I'm here to protect the rights of all the members of the House, including the minority. And it seems like that's completely gone.
But Bob, that's what Democrats do. And I mean, you and I had a private conversation about something going on down in Washington where Democrats try to take the high road, try to do the right thing when they're in power. And when we're not in power, we get savaged, as is being described here today. And when we were speaking on the phone, Bob, my opinion is when you have the power, the days of working together are over, not because we want it, but because they want it. They chose this back when they elected Ronald Reagan.
Well,
it has not changed.
Well, I agree with you about that. But I don't think we can afford to sink to that level without disgracing ourselves. That's maybe where you and I differ a bit on this. I don't think we should join in.
I'm not saying sink, but I am saying stop being Pollyanna.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying sink. I'm not saying do what they do. I'm saying stop thinking that they're not going to do what they do. That's what I'm saying. And I can predict Renny is going to disagree with me too, because you are both better men than I am. But I still have to say, at what point do you just say enough is enough? Stop it. I'm not going to stand for it anymore.
Well, how about that, Renny? You're the leader of the minority here. It's a strong minority, but it's the minority. And you have a long record. You have a long record of being very willing to reach out to people on the other side. I remember in my committee hearing a bill that you brought forward jointly with Al Baldessaro, the #1 Trump supporter probably in the New Hampshire House. You and him came together with a bill. Turned out it wasn't a very good bill, Renny, sorry to say. But, you were together on it. And are you still willing to try and reach out and reach accommodations with the other side? Or, is it gone too far and you just have to exercise every bit of power you can as a minority to try and keep them from doing things?
Well, first of all, as the minority leader, I don't have much power there, which is one of the interesting things about it.
Unfortunately, yes.
I've had conversations with predecessors who said that, how, having been the majority leader, being the minority leader, being the minority leader is the worst job because people think you have power and you don't.
Yeah.
What I do have is the ability to, or hope to have, is the ability to hold the minority caucus together to find those times where we can work with some members of the majority to, perhaps.
And you have to know the rules. The rules are what you got as the minority, to insist that the rules be followed so that you're not just squashed where the rules don't permit that.
Well, but I also recognize that even when that this speaker has, has not shown a willingness all the time to comply with the rules. I just give you a little example.
Please.
We're supposed to, the seats on committees are supposed to be apportioned based upon the percentage that won in the election. So we're about 53-48%, 53-48. The majority is 58-40. So the committee, so it means that most of the committee should be like either comprised of like 10-9 or 11-9. And we had a situation where the finance committee, which is where the money goes, where we were originally supposed to have, 13, they were supposed to have 13 members and we were going to have 11 members. And instead, the speaker just decided that he was going to take 2 seats away from the minority. And there was nothing we can do about it. We can challenge his ruling. And even though the rules say that it should be done in close approximation, and it didn't follow the rules, there's no way to enforce the rules when if the speaker just declares that if he's just going to ignore the rules and the majority is going to go along with the speaker ignoring the rules, we don't have any other recourse.
Yeah.
Traditionally, other than naming and shaming.
But Renny, when we do retake the majority, and we will, because New Hampshire is in fact a blue state, when the Democrats retake the majority, you know what? They're going to follow the rules, and they're going to give every kind of deference to the Republicans, and make it as difficult as possible for us to pass the agenda that truly would help the people of New Hampshire.
Well, go ahead.
I'd like to think that this is not my challenge. Is to to try to unify the caucus within the state house or the virtual state house. But what's important is that we are able to amplify and get the message out of what is going on and the kind of abuse of power and the reactionary agenda that's being promoted and carried out by this Republican majority. I think people are looking back with some nostalgia to the good old days when Bill O'Brien was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. We saw all
that was the horror show of horror shows.
No, but I will say at that time there was a backstop, and that was we had a Democratic governor. There's no backstop now.
Yeah.
And so what we have the agenda. So you see, in many ways, what the Republicans are trying to define this, the universe of legislators should be divided into 2 categories, not Democrat and Republican, but pro-Sununu or anti-Sununu Republicans. And they're having, that's where there's disagreements there. I mean, and our concern is that they're both, pox on both of their houses because, there are some instances where we just have to call out all the bad programs that the entire caucus is. When they're unified, they can do anything. I mean, let's not talk about gun violence prevention. Let's not talk about, let's deny that there's climate change.
net metering,
Yep.
rail service to Manchester.
Well,
the list goes on and on and on.
It just grieves me to say, as the former chairman of the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, that the leadership of that committee is now, and I've written a piece about this, I hope to get published soon, they're total ideologues. I mean, they don't let the facts get in the way of their preconceived notions, that any contribution to energy efficiency funding through our electric bills is a tax and therefore has to be opposed and shouldn't even be allowed to the PUC to adjust because they call it a tax, even though none of it is collected by the government. It doesn't fund the government. And in any event, energy efficiency is going to save money. I mean, ideological blindness is there all the time. Let me just talk to a couple of other things that are very big. Here's a hardy perennial, Renny, you voted on many times. Right to work. As you mentioned last time when the Republicans controlled both houses to a degree, we had a Democratic governor, John Lynch, and he was the one that saved New Hampshire from the so-called right to work, which we all know is really right to work for less, by his veto. And it was a close thing. But that stop is not there now. And yet, in the New Hampshire House has always been the place where right to work has come a cropper, except in that the O'Brien years when the Governor Lynch stopped it. Is that coming up, and what do you think? I mean, will there be enough Republicans to join the Democrats to stop New Hampshire being the first state in the entire Northeast U.S. to go with this union-busting measure?
Well, I think it's going to have a public hearing on I believe the 25th of this month, and it may end up being, thrown into the mix with the next time that we meet in full session. Yeah. I do know that there are some conscious Republicans out there. I think there's some Republicans who are, have like an intellectual consistency that recognize that what the right to work is, what they're trying to do is interject the government into a private contractual relationship that would be a contract between an employer and employee. So this is the one time that you kind of want the government to come and intervene and prohibit an activity by a private actor. I think, it's going to be hotly contested. I will just say that, and remains to be seen. It will be a contested, and it's a priority, and priority on some people, but there's also some opposition.
And the other, I think, really big one was this education voucher bill to withdraw major funding from our public school system and divert it to, private schools, even though they may be nominally public in some ways, including religious schools and sectarian schools and so forth, which I guess is not going to go forward in the House in this session, although maybe something coming over to you from the Senate on this. What do you think the likely fate of this is going to be? And overall, how are you doing business with so few meetings and so many bills? I mean, is everything going to be pushed off to the second session year of this term, or are you actually going to get anything done?
Well, we will see about that, Bob. I do know that the Speaker we gave the Speaker the authority to waive the deadlines because of the pandemic, and the Speaker has done that. So the reporting deadlines that were supposed to be in place for like last Friday and next Friday, but all bills now are going to be due to be reported out, I guess, the 1st of April or the 2nd of April, but all bills have to be reported out on April 9th, whatever that last Friday, that first Friday full week. So everything is kind of coming to a head. I know that it seems to be right now that there are many bills who are just going to be retained, but for instance, we haven't even begun hearings they're just starting hearings on the governor's operating budget. Yeah,
that's the biggest agenda item in the first session of every term is the budget, which affects people. You think we're talking kind of inside baseball up in, well, not in Concord, we're not meeting in Concord now, but in the legislature. But these things affect every one of you folks out there that are listening and watching this show. This budget is the number one thing that affects every citizen of New Hampshire in some way.
And so we're concerned, the budget is it's a big fight for us. I mean, we're concerned about the Republican budget being designed to downshift further responsibilities on the cities and towns, that the state will walk away from its obligations to provide, services and needs, and that what the budget will do is force up property taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's everything that's designed. When the governor likes to talk about, getting taxes under control, the one thing that he doesn't talk about is getting property taxes under control.
Yeah.
And the business community should know that every business in the state pays onerous property taxes. And if they want to do like a little targeted, change in some of the business profit taxes, the business enterprise taxes, that would affect just a minority of the businesses. If they really were serious about property tax relief, about tax reform, they would deal with the property taxes, and that's what's going to happen. Democrats, when we passed our last budget 2 years ago, we, for the first time in a generation, increased aid to cities and towns, directed at education. That's all on the chopping block. We don't know how we will, what the budget will look like over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And, it's just a moment of concern. And there's all kinds of stuff that's wrapped into the budget that, that's a whole topic. Have Mary Jane Walno come in and tell you what's with the goodies that are in there. Or Lou can do, you have Lou obviously there.
Yeah.
Who's a resource.
Lou's on our show every the first Wednesday of the month, and we certainly want to talk to him when the first Monday of the next month in April comes around, and we do the show together. Yeah.
Right. And then we get the absurdity of to a certain extent, we've been the experience where the governor has had the authority to, to spend over $1 billion in discretionary funds, but and who knows where the holes are going to be filled in the government. The governor wanted, he was opposed to the American Recovery Act. He seemingly doesn't want money coming from the federal government anymore, from President Biden, and yet watch and see what he does when money becomes fungible. How when it comes to the state, I don't anticipate he's going to be sending back money to help us open schools, money to help us get, deal with all the problems that came from the pandemic.
Yeah. Hey, we're almost done, Renny, and I just want to come back to kind of a little more personal question. Are you having any fun? Are you glad that you ran and succeeded in running for minority leader? And given the fact that you do have a serious illness, you look good. I mean, it really is delightful to see you, and you look good. But I know I know you've got a serious illness. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, Bob.
You look like it. You've always had a wonderful sense of humor. I think that's a saving grace, one of your many.
Well, right. We all need a sense of humor in these difficult times. So,
yeah,
I think. And what bolsters me are the 186 Democrats who get up every day and try to make the state of New Hampshire a little bit better place.
Yeah.
And that's a gift to be able to.
Has the caucus been pretty united and exercising what authority it can as the minority in a united and collegial fashion?
Yes. I mean, I'll just give you an example. There was an effort to, there was a mixed up state reps election in Windham that's been the source of controversy. And there was an amendment put on the bill from the Senate that would, take a look at it. It was fast tracked, and the speaker wanted me to go along with a motion just to pass the bill without ever having a public hearing, either in the Senate or the House. And Democrats we refused to go along that. So we forced them to actually have a public hearing. And what turned out is that the people of Windham tried to do, were present and, forced changes in this bill to make it be, instead of what some people thought it was designed to be a cover-up, to make one that actually will provide for some accountability for what happened to them. So there are times when our votes matter.
Hey, Renny, my hero, this hour's flown by. I can only say we've got to have you back because I got a lot more I'd like to talk with you about. And I'm sorry we didn't get calls today, but there will be people watching and we'll get a reaction to the show. Mike, I can't wait for you to be back here with me. I just can't wait. I know you're being cautious. I'm honoring that. But I
almost
just can't
there,
wait.
Bob. We're almost there.
And you're going to be responsible for our St. Patrick's Day show next week. So That's on you.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll take up that mantle,
All right.
Bob. We'll see you guys next
Give my
week.
best to your lovely family, Renny, and it's wonderful to have you on. Take care. Thanks for joining us.